Ever wonder what it's like when Hollywood meets the Supreme Court? Well, Denzel Washington, yes, that Denzel Washington, went before the highest court in the land with a powerful goal: to be heard. Justice Storer, initially, tried to shut him down. But she didn't expect how incredibly calm he would be, and how that calm would subtly change the whole courtroom atmosphere. What started as a regular legal argument quickly turned into a profound moment of truth. By the end, even the justices were quiet, truly listening. Before we get into the details, tell us where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on moments like this. Everyone told Denzel not to bring his Hollywood calm into the Supreme Court's serious halls. They warned him to stick to the law, not philosophize or tell stories. But Denzel wasn't fazed because he knew this wasn't just any hearing. This was Henderson versus Texas, a case that could completely change how congressional districts are drawn nationwide. When those big wooden doors opened that morning, you could feel a quiet, heavy tension in the air. Denzel sat at the counsel table, focused, his notes untouched. He wasn't relying on a script. He brought something much more impactful than paper. Stories. Not about legal clauses, but about real people, real lives, and real consequences. Across from him sat Justice Sonia Sotomayor, sharp, powerful, and unyielding. She had made it clear this case would be decided strictly on legal precedent and principles, not on what she called sentimental wanderings. Yet, that's exactly what Denzel intended to deliver. As the session began, everyone leaned in. Reporters already had their headlines ready: Washington challenges court. Sotomayor shuts him down. But they had no idea what was truly coming. Denzel stood up, no drama, just 5 simple words. "Your Honors, I'd like to begin not with a statute, but with a story." Eyebrows went up. Whispers started. Sotomayor narrowed her eyes. Just minutes in, she cut him off. "This court does not adjudicate feelings, Mr. Washington," she said, her voice firm and cold. "We rule on law." The room went silent. That was supposed to be the end of it. But Denzel didn't flinch or raise his voice. He let a quiet moment pass, then leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "With all due respect, Justice," he began, "the law is a map, but without knowing where the people live, it's just paper." Sotomayor didn't blink. The Constitution provides structure. Emotion doesn't override structure. "That's true," Denzel calmly replied, "but emotion, fear, hope, outrage, those built the Constitution. The founders didn't write it in silence. They wrote it through struggle, through loss, through lives." A subtle ripple went through the courtroom. Not a sound, but a feeling in the air, as if people realized they were hearing something different, something important. He continued, "There's a man in East Texas, Leonard Henderson. Same farm, same soil, same story for 3 generations. But every time they redraw the map, his voice fades. His vote counts for less." Sotomayor raised a hand to interrupt. "Senator, anecdote is not evidence." Denzel didn't miss a beat. "I'm not asking this court to rule on Leonard's story. I'm asking it to remember it, because that's the difference between interpreting law and understanding why law matters in the first place." The judges on the bench began to shift. Chief Justice Roberts, usually unreadable, now watched Denzel intently. Justice Jackson leaned in. Even Justice Alito, rarely swayed by emotion, rested his hand under his chin. Denzel wasn't performing or preaching. He was grounding complex legal theory in a simple truth. People aren't just numbers, they're the reason the numbers matter. Sotomayor looked away for a moment, not dismissively, but thoughtfully. There was a pause that suggested he had reached her. Her voice softened slightly. "I understand your point," she said. "But don't forget what's at stake here is the structural integrity of representative government." "And that structure," Denzel responded, "only works when it includes the people it claims to represent." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. In that instant, The balance had shifted. Denzel was no longer just the outsider being corrected. He was a powerful force, demanding not just to be heard, but to be understood. And for the first time in that courtroom, Justice Sotomayor didn't immediately respond. She remained silent for a long moment, studying Denzel. Not the movie star, but the man behind the calm demeanor. The courtroom had changed, and she felt it. This wasn't just a legal procedure anymore. Denzel had placed the weight of human lives on the scales. Now she had to decide how to handle that. Finally, her voice broke the silence.
"Mr. Washington," she said evenly, "this court is not a political stage.
We are not legislators. We interpret the law. If you're concerned with policy, your argument belongs in Congress, not here." Denzel didn't flinch.
"With respect, Justice," he said slowly and deliberately, "Congress writes the laws.
You decide what they mean. But somewhere between the ink and the interpretation, the people get lost." She leaned back slightly, showing her annoyance. "You're asking us to step outside our role." Denzel nodded gently. "I'm asking you to remember why that role matters." A soft murmur went through the back of the chamber. No one dared speak. But it was clear Denzel wasn't just holding his ground. He was building something. And then it happened. The line that would be on every news broadcast by sundown.
"If a law can be interpreted without ever hearing the people it governs," Denzel said, "then that law might as well have been written in the dark." Even the court stenographer paused for a moment before catching up. Sotomayor narrowed her eyes, not in anger, but in calculation. She wasn't used to being met like this, not with aggression, but with strong conviction. Justice Kagan leaned forward. "Mr. Washington," she asked, "can you clarify what relief your client is seeking?" Denzel's response was steady. "Representation," he said. "Not mathematically, not ideologically, just fairly. Leonard Henderson lives in a district that's been cracked, packed, redrawn, erased so many times he's forgotten who actually represents him. All we're asking is for this court to recognize that democracy means more than a zip code." Justice Barrett scribbled a note. Justice Thomas didn't move, but his gaze was fixed. Then Justice Storer returned, measured but firm. "Mr. Washington, if we start inserting narrative into every legal argument, we risk undermining consistency in the law." Denzel's answer was quiet, but it cut like truth. "And if we don't, we risk consistency replacing justice." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled, heavy, certain, real. Everyone knew it, from the judges to the press. Even Sotomayor knew it, but she wasn't backing down yet. In her mind, he still hadn't proven that a story could outweigh a legal standard. And he was going to try. She adjusted her glasses, locking her gaze on Denzel. "Let's talk about the map," she said flatly. The courtroom went silent again. "This is a redistricting case," she continued, "not poetry. Do you dispute the legislature's right to draw boundaries based on population?" Denzel responded without hesitation. "No, Your Honor, but I do dispute its right to manipulate those boundaries until entire communities disappear." She didn't blink. "That's a claim of gerrymandering. We've ruled on those before." Denzel took a small step forward, still grounded. "And in every one of those rulings," he said, "you could consider numbers, precedent, algorithms, but not once did anyone ask what it feels like to be counted, but not heard." Sotomayor pressed harder. "Mr. Washington, feelings don't guide district lines." He leaned forward slightly. "Maybe they should guide where you don't draw them." And there it was again. That shift, that subtle intake of breath across the courtroom, as everyone realized Denzel wasn't there for technical legal sparring. He was pulling the conversation out of the law books and into the actual neighborhoods. Chief Justice Roberts cleared his throat. "What you're suggesting, Mr. Washington, is that we consider identity and culture when drawing district lines." Denzel nodded. Not just identity, he said, continuity. A family's church, their kid's school, the corner store they've gone to for 30 years. These things exist in a circle, but when you slice that circle to tilt the vote, you're not redistricting. You're dividing lives. Then he turned, fully facing the bench. There's a town called Jasper, East Texas. Used to be one district. Now it's cut into 3. A grandmother, her son, her granddaughter all live on the same street, but now they vote in 3 different precincts. Justice Gorsuch looked up. Do you have that map? Denzel nodded once. Submitted with our brief, page 16. These lines, Denzel said, calm but sharp, don't follow geography, they follow outcome. That hit hard, not loudly, but it resonated. And Justice Sotomayor didn't like it, because for the first time, this wasn't abstract. This wasn't clean constitutional theory. Denzel had condensed the case down to a single street, a single home, a single family. And now everyone in the courtroom could feel it, not just read it. Still, Sotomayor held her ground. She had to. The courts do not redraw maps, she said, her voice tight and formal. We ensure the process is constitutional. Denzel didn't blink. And what if that process is weaponized? He asked. Do you still stand by and call it fair? Silence fell, but it wasn't the kind that shuts down conversations. It was the kind that opens them. A question had been planted, and everyone in the room knew it wasn't going away. Because if this court couldn't say when a map becomes a weapon, then who could? As the justices pondered that, Denzel prepared his next move, shifting from maps to justice itself. Sotomayor glanced at her notes, her voice cooler now, but not dismissive. Mr. Washington, she said, you've presented compelling imagery, but the Constitution doesn't guarantee emotional satisfaction. It guarantees equal protection under the law. Denzel nodded slowly. And that's exactly what's being denied. Quietly, precisely, legally. Now, the whole courtroom leaned forward again. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. Justice, he said, the Constitution may be colorblind, but maps aren't, and neither are the people who draw them. That landed, and quickly, Justice Storer jumped in. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious case, Denzel replied. Then Justice Kagan leaned in. Are you asking this court to re-examine the standard for determining discriminatory intent in redistricting? Denzel didn't flinch. Yes, because the current standard lets intent hide behind math. The Constitution is being used to justify exclusion, just with cleaner lines. Justice Storer raised a brow. And your evidence for that is stories? Denzel didn't hesitate. No, my evidence is pattern. Districts drawn, redrawn, always curving just enough to carve out dissent. Same neighborhoods split again and again until they lose power, lose voice, lose hope. He paused, then delivered the crucial blow. And when you ask who benefits, it's never the voters. That landed hard, and then softer. The fact that it's legal doesn't mean it's right. Now, Justice Thomas spoke for the first time. Isn't that a political question, Mr. Washington? Denzel turned to him, measured but resolute. It's a constitutional one first. Because when a citizen's vote is diluted, not erased, not ignored, just quietly thinned out, that's not politics. That's erosion. And erosion doesn't make a sound until the whole thing collapses. Even Sotomayor was silent. This wasn't grandstanding or theater. It was a challenge. Denzel wasn't asking for sympathy. He was demanding careful examination. Then he looked back up at the bench. Let me ask this, he said. If this court existed in 1787 and a town was split right down the middle to keep some folks from voting, would you call that process fair? Sotomayor responded, but her voice dropped a half a tone. The law evolves. Denzel nodded once. And it should, he said, but not by forgetting where it came from.
Then he paused and let the next words sink in. The Constitution isn't a wall. It's a foundation. And if we don't check for cracks, it's not the roof that falls first. It's the people underneath it. That was the line that stopped the courtroom. Even Sotomayor had no reply because, whether she agreed or not, she couldn't deny it. Denzel had taken the fight directly to the core of the court. And he wasn't finished. Justice Stohr shifted in her chair. Mr. Washington, we must base our rulings on precedent. That's how the judiciary maintains stability. Denzel didn't even blink. Stability, he said, is only valuable when it doesn't lock injustice in place. That hit deeper than expected. You could feel it across the room. If precedent alone ruled the day, segregation would still be law. Women would still be voiceless. Stability isn't justice. It's just the default setting. Sotomayor leaned in. Now then, what would you have us do, Mr. Washington? Create doctrine from emotion? Rewrite the rules based on feeling? Denzel didn't break stride. No, I'm asking you to recognize that when precedent begins to suffocate democracy, it's time to ask if the principle behind it still holds. Then he turned, looking at the full bench. Redistricting cases are always complicated, he said. But that complexity shouldn't be a shield for silence. In Henderson versus Texas, we're not just debating maps. We're asking if the system can still hear its people. Justice Barrett tapped her pen. Justice Jackson whispered something to Roberts. But Denzel kept pressing. You asked for legal clarity, he said. Here's one. When a district is drawn in such a way that it consistently breaks up a community of shared interest over and over again, someone's rights aren't being protected. They're being managed. Justice Gorsuch leaned in. What alternative standard are you proposing, Mr. Washington? Denzel didn't rush. He let the question settle, then responded softly but sharply. Start by asking the right questions. Who benefits? Who disappears? And if the answers stay the same and the lines keep shifting, then maybe precedent isn't holding the system up. Maybe it's just holding it still. Now Sotomayor stepped back in, her voice cool, her tone clipped. You're walking a fine line, Mr. Washington, between advocacy and instability. But Denzel didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just looked her straight on. Respectfully, Justice, instability is already here. It's in the silence of communities who don't believe their ballot matters. In the apathy that grows when people feel erased. I'm not asking this court to discard precedent. I'm asking you to remember why it exists in the first place. And the pause that followed wasn't out of confusion. It was out of respect. Even the skeptics could feel it. Denzel had reframed the stakes, not as a technical dispute over boundary lines, but as a test. Does the Constitution still breathe? In a room where legal doctrine usually dominated, Denzel had offered something different, a reason to care. But the hardest hit hadn't landed yet, because Sotomayor next went for the one opening Denzel hadn't addressed, his motive. She folded her hands and, with a voice calm but razor-edged, asked, Mr. Washington, are you here to defend your client or to build your own legacy? The room froze. Reporters stopped typing. Even the clerks didn't move. It was the kind of question you don't ask in open court because it's not about the law. It's about ego, ambition, and intention. Denzel didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't perform. I'm here, he said quietly, because I still believe the court listens. Sotomayor's stare didn't soften. You've delivered a courtroom full of metaphor and narrative, Mr. Washington. But the law demands objectivity. How do we separate your passion from your purpose? His answer came slowly but heavily, like iron being laid on the bench. You don't, because real law never lives in a vacuum. It exists in the tension between logic and humanity. And right now, Justice, that tension is broken. Justice Kagan glanced over at Sotomayor. She didn't interrupt. Nobody did. Denzel continued, My purpose is to protect one man's right to fair representation. My passion is making sure he's not the last one who gets it." Then he paused, letting the silence hold. If that's legacy, so be it. But it started with Leonard Henderson, and it ends with whether this court believes he still matters. The room sat still until, unexpectedly, Sotomayor herself spoke again, this time softer. "Do you think we've stopped listening?" Denzel didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just answered honestly, "I think you're listening now, and that's why I showed up." And that was the closest thing to mutual respect anyone had seen between them all day. Because beneath the legal clash, there was something deeper, understanding. She might still question his approach, but now she was considering his intent. And that was the opening Denzel needed. Because what came next wasn't about precedent or procedure anymore. It was about something bigger, a question this court hadn't fully asked itself. Can democracy survive when its map no longer reflects its people? That question would define everything that followed. And this time, it wasn't Denzel who would deliver the surprise. A pause lingered, longer than expected. Then, from the right side of the bench, a voice broke the silence. "I'd like to revisit Mr. Washington's final question." All heads turned. It was Justice Elena Kagan, known for being measured, pragmatic, never one to drift toward sentiment. So when she leaned forward, even the gallery stilled. "You asked," she said, "whether democracy can survive when its map no longer reflects its people." She paused, then added, "That's not just a legal question. That's existential." Denzel said nothing, hands folded, still listening. Kagan continued, "There is precedent, yes, but there is also erosion. And what this court is wrestling with, what I'm wrestling with, is whether the tools we've relied on still measure what matters." Chief Justice Roberts stirred in his seat, but didn't speak. Kagan glanced toward her colleagues. "Every decade, the districts change, and every decade we say the process is flawed but constitutional. At some point, we have to ask if the same communities keep getting pushed to the margins. Are we judging fairness or just managing it?" Justice Jackson nodded quietly, but the shift was clear. Denzel's challenge had broken through. Sotomayor remained silent for now. Then Kagan turned back to Denzel. "You've made your case for Leonard Henderson, but this court needs more than one story. It needs a principle." Justice Gorsuch leaned forward. "Mr. Washington, what rule are you asking us to set?" Denzel didn't hesitate. "A simple one, that any redistricting plan which splits a cohesive community of interest into multiple districts without compelling justification should be presumed unconstitutional." A low murmur stirred in the back row, legal aides glancing at each other. This wasn't procedural anymore. It was real. Justice Gorsuch spoke again. That presumption would shift the burden of proof. Denzel nodded. It would, because right now the burden is on the people being silenced to prove they've been erased. I'm suggesting we shift that burden to the ones doing the erasing. Even Justice Barrett looked up from her notes. The idea had landed. Sotomayor still hadn't spoken, but her face had changed. Not resistance now, but calculation. She wasn't pushing against him anymore. She was running the numbers. Denzel could see it, because the room wasn't just listening now, it was weighing. He had come in as the outsider, but now the court was debating on his terms. Still, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Because Sotomayor had one more line to draw. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured but sharp. "Mr. Washington, your argument is compelling, but dangerously broad. If we set the precedent you propose, what stops every community from claiming interest just to block a map they dislike?" She was pushing, not because she doubted the harm, but because agreeing with him would mean challenging her own foundation. Denzel straightened his shoulders. Because the standard wouldn't be based on preference. It would be based on evidence, historical, cultural, geographic coherence, school districts, shared infrastructure, voting patterns.
When a community lives, works, and votes as one, and you split it without cause, it's not an oversight, it's a strategy. Sotomayor fired back. Strategic or political? Denzel held her gaze. Both. But when strategy consistently results in disenfranchisement, it becomes a constitutional concern. She pressed harder. That's a slippery slope. Denzel didn't miss a beat. And silence is a deeper one. If we don't name what's happening at the map-making level, we're validating it with every ruling we make. Now, Sotomayor leaned back slightly. You want us to weigh culture and identity in every redistricting case. That invites chaos. No, Denzel said, his voice low but firm. It invites accountability. That one hit harder than expected because she knew what he meant. He wasn't asking the court to fix everything. He was asking them to stop pretending nothing was broken. Sotomayor glanced at Justice Jackson, then back at Denzel. You said earlier the Constitution is a foundation, not a wall. But aren't you ignoring the structure it provides? If we blur that structure, Mr. Washington, what remains of the law? Denzel's voice dropped, not in volume, but in gravity. The law remains, but maybe for the first time, it starts seeing the people it's supposed to serve. And then for the first time that session, Sotomayor didn't reply. Not because she lacked an argument, but because she saw what he had just done. He hadn't dismantled her logic. He had reshaped it. And now she wasn't shutting him down. She was considering him. The argument had changed, and so had the room. But the final moment hadn't come. Not yet. Because the ending wouldn't be about the law or precedent or even legacy. It would come down to one unexpected gesture. Chief Justice Roberts looked across the bench. Unless there are further questions, he said, we'll begin our deliberations. But before the gavel dropped, Justice Sotomayor raised her hand. Just one more comment, she said. The room froze. Everyone expected a final rebuke. Instead, she turned to Denzel and said the words no one saw coming. This court was never meant to be distant from the people. And while we are bound by law, we are also bound by duty. What you reminded us of today, Mr. Washington, is that those two are not always the same thing. She paused, then quietly added, and maybe they shouldn't be. Denzel didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded solemnly, because he knew what had just happened. It wasn't surrender or concession. It was bridge building. Exactly what he came to do. The courtroom sat in silence a few seconds too long. Long enough for everyone to realize something rare had just occurred. A justice had admitted on the record, in front of cameras and colleagues, that maybe the law as structured wasn't doing enough. Outside, the headlines lit up like sparks. Sotomayor softens in Supreme clash with Washington. Supreme Court hears redistricting case. And here's the people too. But inside, Denzel simply gathered his notes. No final punchline, no victory speech, no grandstanding, just a quiet, "Thank you, Your Honors. That's all I needed to say." And as he walked out, the justices remained seated, still thinking. Because he hadn't just argued a case. He had shifted the entire conversation about maps, about people, about justice, and what it might look like when it finally listens to the ones it was meant to protect.